No ring, no rules, no regrets. Before we dive into the story, tell me where in the world you're watching from, and if this story steals your heart, please hit subscribe. The low thrum of a double bass coiled through the smoky air of the Onyx Lounge, a members-only sanctuary where Santon's apex predators whispered deals into existence over 100 rand a sip whiskey. For Zara Cumulo, the air was not thick with opportunity, but with the suffocating tension of a war she was hired to win. Her reflection in the polished black marble bar was a study in controlled perfection. A sleek jet-black bob that grazed her jawline, sharp cheekbones sculpted by genetics and determination, and warm brown eyes lined with the precision of a surgeon. A fitted charcoal suit encased her tall frame, hinting at the strength beneath, while a whisper of a silk camisole offered a deceptive softness. Her red lacquered nails, drumming a silent, anxious rhythm on her clutch, were the only outward sign of the storm brewing within. She was here to defend Innovate SA, a titan of the South African tech industry, from the voracious appetite of Valentino Holdings, and more specifically from its founder, Marco Valentino, a man known less as a CEO and more as a corporate conqueror. The negotiation was a billion-rand chess match, and Zara was the queen, tasked with protecting her king, a board of directors fractured by ego and fear. The most poisonous piece on that board, however, was a ghost from her past, Damien, her ex-husband. His presence was not a coincidence. He had bought a significant share in Innovate SA months ago, a calculated move to reinsert himself into her life under the guise of business. He thrived on her discomfort, and this hostile takeover was his grand stage. Zara felt his eyes on her from across the room, a familiar, possessive gaze that still had the power to make the fine hairs on her arms stand on end. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her water, the condensation on the glass, a cool shock against her fingertips, and focused on the man at the center of the storm. Marco Valentino moved through the opulent lounge like he owned the very air the other patrons breathed. He was broad-shouldered and stood at an imposing height, his midnight blue tailored suit a second skin that did little to hide the raw power in his frame. His olive complexion and close-cropped dark hair spoke of Mediterranean heritage, but his eyes were a startling glacial gray, devoid of warmth and full of chilling assessment. A 3-day stubble shadowed a jawline that was all hard angles, made even more intimidating by a faint, silvery scar that cut a line near the hinge, a silent testament to a life that had not been spent entirely in boardrooms. The formal pre-negotiation dinner was a thinly veiled battlefield, and the first skirmish began when Damien made his move. He approached her table with the predatory grace of a jackal, a sycophantic smile plastered on his face that never reached his cold eyes. He leaned in, his cologne an acrid memory she could not escape, and placed a hand possessively on the back of her chair. "Zara, darling," he began, his voice pitched just loud enough for the surrounding tables, including Marco's, to hear. "Still playing the Ice Queen, I see. You'd think after all our time together you would have learned a little warmth. Or perhaps you're just saving it for a man who can afford you now." His words were a public execution, designed to strip away her professional armor and expose the raw wounds of their shared history. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at the edges of her composure. She could feel the shift in the room's atmosphere, the curious glances, the slight pause in conversation. Her career was built on impenetrable control, and he was trying to shatter it with a single, well-aimed blow. Her mind raced, searching for an escape, a rebuttal, a way to turn his venom back on him without causing a scene that would irrevocably damage her client's position. It was then that her gaze locked with Marco Valentino's across the room. He was watching, not with pity or amusement, but with a clinical, predatory interest, his gray eyes missing nothing. In that split second, a desperate, reckless idea ignited in Zara's mind. It was a lie born of pure survival instinct. She turned her head slowly, allowing a small, enigmatic smile to touch her lips, and directed it not at Damien but past him toward Marco. She let her voice drop to an intimate, suggestive murmur. "Actually, Damien," she said, her tone smooth as silk, "I was just waiting for my ride. Marco and I have a prior engagement to attend to, and we really shouldn't be late." The lie was audacious, a high-wire act without a net. She had thrown down a gauntlet, linking herself to the very man she was supposed to be fighting, creating a fiction of intimacy that was as unbelievable as it was effective. Damien froze, his smug expression faltering as he followed her gaze to the imposing figure of Marco Valentino. The air crackled. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, no one moved. Marco's expression remained unreadable, a mask of cold neutrality. He could have exposed her lie with a single word, a shake of his head, and left her to be devoured. Instead, he did something far more devastating. He pushed his chair back with a soft scrape against the polished floor, rose to his full height, and began to walk toward them. His movements were fluid and deliberate, the controlled motion of a panther closing in on its prey. Every eye in the room followed him. He stopped beside their table, his presence a palpable force that dwarfed Damien completely. He did not look at Zara. His ice-gray eyes were fixed on Damien, a silent, chilling dismissal that stripped the other man of all his blustering confidence. "She is correct." Marco's voice was a low, gravelly baritone, a sound that resonated with innate authority and a hint of something dangerous. "We have business to discuss. You are interrupting." He then shifted his gaze to Zara, and for the first time, she felt the full, undivided force of his attention. It was like being pinned in the beam of a searchlight. "Are you ready to leave, Zara?" The sound of her name on his lips was a possessive claim, sealing the lie in granite and turning her desperate gambit into an undeniable fact. The balance of power in the room had not just shifted, it had been utterly and irrevocably remade. Zara, the PR queen, had just bound herself to the corporate king, and in his cold, calculating eyes, she saw that the price of her lie would be steep. The ride in Marco's limousine was a masterclass in suffocating silence. The city lights of Santon streaked past the tinted windows, painting fleeting patterns on the plush leather interior, but inside the car, the world had shrunk to the space between them. Zara sat perfectly still, her hands clasped in her lap, her mind a whirlwind of strategic calculations and primal fear. She had won the battle with Damien, but had potentially started a far more dangerous war with the man beside her. He had not spoken a word since they left the lounge, simply guiding her with a firm, impersonal hand on the small of her back. He did not exude anger. What radiated from him was far more unsettling. A cold, coiled energy, like a predator patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The car finally glided to a halt, not in front of a hotel or residence, but in a private, subterranean garage beneath a towering skyscraper of black glass and steel, the headquarters of Valentino Holdings. The door was opened by a driver with the build of a professional fighter and the eyes of a loyal soldier. Marco led her to a private elevator that ascended with dizzying, silent speed, opening directly into a sprawling penthouse office that offered a god's-eye view of the glittering city below. The room was a monument to minimalist power, all chrome, glass, and dark wood, with not a single personal item to betray the humanity of its owner. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, his back to her, a formidable silhouette against the urban nebula. "That was a bold move," he stated, his voice calm, yet it echoed with the weight of his authority in the cavernous space. "Using me as a shield. You put me in a position where denying your claim would have made me look weak, and siding with you made me look complicit. Clever." Zara finally found her voice, her tone steady despite the hammering of her heart against her ribs. "It was a necessary one. Damien is a liability to my client and a problem for me. My only objective was to de-escalate the situation with minimal professional fallout." Marco turned slowly, his gray eyes pinning her in place. "You did more than de-escalate," he countered, taking a slow step toward her. "You opened a new negotiation, one that has nothing to do with Innovate SA. You lied, and I validated that lie. That creates a debt." He stopped just a few feet from her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the faint, clean scent of expensive cologne and something else, something uniquely masculine and intimidating. "I dislike unresolved debts, Zara." He continued his deliberate advance until he was standing directly in front of her, forcing her to tilt her head back slightly to meet his gaze. "Your ex-husband is a problem. I can make him disappear." "Not literally," he added, a flicker of something that might have been dark humor in his eyes, "but professionally, financially. He will cease to be a factor in your life and in these negotiations. That is my offer." Zara's breath hitched. She had expected threats, demands, a corporate shakedown. She had not expected this. "And in return," she asked, her voice a near whisper, "what is your price?" Marco's gaze drifted from her eyes down to her lips, a slow, deliberate journey that felt more intimate than a touch. "Information," he said, his voice dropping lower. You are on the inside of a fractured board. I want to know where the cracks are, who is loyal, who is wavering. I want your insight." And he paused, letting the silence stretch. "I want to continue the arrangement you so publicly initiated." Her mind reeled. He was blurring every conceivable line, mixing business and something far more personal into a dangerous cocktail. "What kind of arrangement?" she challenged, her defiance a shield against the sudden, unwanted pull of attraction she felt. "One with no strings," he clarified, his voice a low, seductive rumble. "No claims, no rings, no rules, no regrets." The chemistry between us in that room was undeniable. We are two people who understand power, who dislike complications. We negotiate the merger during the day, and at night we negotiate this. It is a transaction, just like any other. My protection for your insight, with a physical clause to satisfy a mutual need. He was offering her a deal with the devil, a way to solve her Damien problem and indulge a dark, simmering desire she had long suppressed. It was a terrifying proposition, one that went against every rule she had set for herself after her disastrous marriage. She had vowed never to belong to any man, never to cede an inch of her hard-won independence. Yet, the logic of his proposal was undeniable. It was a power move, a way to take control of a chaotic situation. And the temptation, the pure, unadulterated temptation to feel the kind of power he wielded, to be close to it, was a drug she found herself craving. "Fine," she heard herself say, the word tasting like surrender and defiance all at once. "No strings, no claims, but understand this, Marco. In the boardroom, I am your opponent. I will fight you for my client with everything I have. This arrangement changes nothing." A slow, predatory smile touched his lips for the first time, transforming his harsh features into something devastatingly handsome. "I would expect nothing less," he murmured, before closing the small distance between them and capturing her mouth with his. The kiss was not gentle. It was a signing of a contract, a declaration of terms, a raw, dominant claiming that sent a shockwave of heat through her entire body, sealing their dangerous, intoxicating pact. The next few days were a blur of high-stakes tension, a delicate dance on a razor's edge. In the glass-walled boardroom of Innovate SA, Zara was a formidable adversary, parrying Marco's aggressive acquisition tactics with brilliant PR strategies and meticulously crafted counteroffers. She was sharp, relentless, and earned his grudging professional respect. But when night fell, the boardroom adversary became a willing participant in their arrangement. Their encounters were intense, incendiary meetings in his penthouse or her sterile, minimalist apartment, fueled by a raw, desperate energy that left them both breathless. It was a game of control, a physical negotiation that mirrored their daytime battles, with no room for softness or sentiment. They were two equals, taking what they needed from each other, and it was a fragile, perfect equilibrium, until Damien shattered it. He had been conspicuously silent, neutered by Marco's public endorsement of Zara, but his fury had been festering in the dark. Unable to attack her directly, he chose a more insidious weapon. The story broke on a Tuesday morning, splashed across the front page of a notorious online gossip tabloid known for its vicious, career-ending exposés. The headline was crude and sensational. "PR Queen's Meltdown. Innovate SA's fixer has a history of hysteria." The article was a masterpiece of malicious insinuation, twisting a deeply traumatic event from Zara's past. A private breakdown she suffered years ago after a brutal miscarriage Damien had callously dismissed, into a narrative of professional instability. It included cherry-picked quotes from a therapist she had seen, quotes he had likely obtained illegally, painting her as a fragile, hysterical woman unfit to manage a high-pressure, billion-rand deal. It was a character assassination of the highest order, designed to utterly discredit her in the eyes of her clients and the public. Zara saw it on her phone just as she was preparing for a crucial meeting with the board. The air left her lungs in a painful rush, and the world tilted on its axis. The clinical professionalism she wore like armor dissolved, leaving her feeling exposed, violated, and sickeningly vulnerable. The past she had worked so hard to bury had been exhumed and put on public display. Her phone began to ring incessantly. Her boss, the Innovate SA CEO, journalists. She ignored them all, sinking onto her couch, the words on the screen blurring through a sudden, hot sting of tears she refused to let fall. Before the panic could fully consume her, there was a sharp, authoritative knock on her door. She knew instinctively who it was. She opened it to find Marco standing there, his face a thunderous mask of cold fury. He held his own phone in his hand, the same disgusting article displayed on its screen. He walked past her into the apartment, his presence immediately dominating the space. "Did you know he would do this?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. She shook her head, unable to speak. "I'll handle it," she finally managed, her voice thin and brittle. "I'll release a statement, threaten legal action." "No," he cut her off, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned to face her, his gray eyes blazing with an intensity she had never seen before. It was not the cold calculation of the CEO. It was something much older, much more primal. "You will do nothing. You will turn off your phone. This is not a public relations problem anymore. This is a personal one, and I handle my personal problems myself." He left without another word. For the rest of the day, Zara was suspended in a state of anxious dread. She had no idea what he intended to do, but the chilling certainty in his voice promised a resolution that would be anything but corporate. The following morning, the tabloid article had vanished from the internet. All links led to an error page. The journalist who wrote it issued a public, groveling retraction, citing gross factual inaccuracies and unethical sourcing, before his social media accounts went dark, and his employer announced he was on an indefinite leave of absence. By noon, news broke that Damien had been abruptly forced to resign from the Innovate SA board after a massive, anonymous data dump revealed a history of embezzlement and fraud from his previous business ventures. By evening, he had liquidated his shares at a significant loss and his whereabouts were unknown. It was a systematic, silent, and terrifyingly efficient annihilation. Marco had not just killed a story, he had erased a man. He came to her apartment that night. The air between them was different, charged with the unspoken reality of what he had done for her. She was no longer just his opponent or his partner in a sterile arrangement. She was someone he had protected with a ruthlessness that was both terrifying and deeply compelling. He stood before her, the faint scar on his jaw seeming more prominent in the low light of her living room. She reached out, her fingers trembling slightly, and traced the silvery line with the tip of her index finger. "How?" she whispered. His jaw tightened under her touch, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something raw and wounded in his glacial eyes. "The world is full of vicious people, Zara," he said, his voice a low rasp. "Some of them operate in boardrooms with contracts, and some operate in alleys with knives. To survive, you have to understand the language of both." He captured her hand, his grip firm but not rough. "This scar," he murmured, his thumb stroking the back of her hand, "was a gift from my uncle. He taught me that loyalty is the only currency that matters, and that betrayal is a debt that must always be paid in full. A lesson he learned right before my father removed him from the family business. Permanently." He was giving her a glimpse behind the curtain, a look into the violent, unforgiving world that had forged him. He had protected her with the ferocity of his family's code, showing her a loyalty she had never known. In that moment, surrounded by the silence of her apartment, Zara knew their arrangement had irrevocably changed. The lines had not just blurred, they had been completely erased, and what was left was something far more dangerous and real than either of them had ever intended. The ghost of Damien was gone, and in his absence, a new, more complicated intimacy bloomed between Zara and Marco. The pretense of their arrangement being a mere transaction had dissolved in the crucible of his brutal protection. Their nights were no longer just about slaking a mutual, detached desire. They were now punctuated by moments of startling vulnerability. He would speak of his father, a man who built a legitimate empire on a foundation of less than legitimate beginnings, and the immense pressure to honor that legacy while sanitizing its roots. She, in turn, found herself sharing pieces of her own past, the ambition that drove her, and the deep-seated fear of ever being powerless again. They were falling for each other, a slow, terrifying, and undeniable descent, and this newfound emotional connection made them both reckless in the boardroom and exposed in the world. Their professional battles continued, but now they were laced with a new electricity, a shared understanding that made every strategic move feel like a move in a much larger, more personal game. They were adversaries who knew the other's deepest wounds, and allies in a war neither had a name for. This change, however, did not go unnoticed. Marco's world was one of shadows and bloodlines, where any perceived softness was a vulnerability to be exploited. His swift and silent dismantling of Damien had sent ripples through the underworld his family had long straddled, and it drew the attention of a particularly venomous snake from his past, his cousin, Nico Gallo. Nico was a relic of the old ways, a man who resented Marco's ambition to legitimize the family's wealth and power. He saw Marco's focus on Valentino Holdings as a betrayal of their heritage, and in Zara, he saw the perfect instrument to bring Marco to his knees. Nico didn't want a piece of the corporate pie. He wanted to burn Marco's new world to the ground. The first move was a competing takeover bid for Innovate SA. It came out of nowhere, from a shell corporation with seemingly limitless funding. The offer was aggressively overvalued, designed not to succeed but to bleed Valentino Holdings dry in a bidding war and to sow chaos among the Innovate SA shareholders. It was a declaration of war, a clear message to Marco that his old life was not finished with him. Zara immediately recognized the strategy for what it was, a scorched earth tactic. "This isn't a business move, Marco," she told him one night, standing in his penthouse office, the competing offer displayed on a large screen. "This is personal. The numbers don't make sense. They're willing to lose a fortune just to make you suffer." Marco stared at the screen, his face grim, his gray eyes colder than she had ever seen them. "It's Nico," he said, the name spoken like a curse. "He always preferred breaking things to building them." The threat escalated quickly. A few days later, as Zara was leaving her office building, a long black car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down to reveal a man with slicked-back hair and eyes as dead as a shark's. He didn't get out. He just smiled, a thin, cruel slash of a smile. "Mr. Gallo sends his regards," the man said, his voice smooth and menacing. "He wants you to know that associating with Marco Valentino has a price. He suggests you walk away, for your health." The car sped off, leaving Zara standing on the pavement, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The threat was not veiled. It was a promise. That night, she told Marco what had happened. He listened without interruption, his entire body coiling into a knot of barely restrained violence. When she finished, he walked to the bar and poured 2 glasses of whiskey, his movements precise and controlled. He handed one to her. "This is my fault," he said, his voice raw with self-loathing. "I brought this into your life. Nico sees you as a weakness, a lever he can use to pry me apart." He took a long drink from his glass. "There is a way out for you, Zara. You can walk away now. I will make sure you are protected, that he can never touch you. You can have your life back, the one you had before you ever met me." It was an offer of freedom, a chance to escape the danger that now clung to her like a shroud. A year ago, she would have taken it without a second thought, her independence and safety being the most precious commodities she possessed. But looking at him now, seeing the conflict and pain in his eyes, she knew that walking away was no longer an option. The life she had before him felt like a black-and-white photograph compared to the vivid, terrifying, and exhilarating world he had shown her. She had come alive in the fire of their connection, and she would not be extinguished by fear. She set her glass down and walked to him, placing her hands on his chest, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. "And what if I don't want that life back?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. "What if this is my life now? You said loyalty is the only currency that matters. Was that just talk, Marco?" His powerful hands came up to cup her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. The look in his eyes was one of awe, despair, and fierce, consuming love. "Staying with me means this never ends, Zara," he whispered, the words a heavy promise. "It means looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. It means accepting a world you were never meant for." "Then I accept," she replied, her voice unwavering. "But we do this on our terms. We don't just survive Nico. We beat him. We beat him in the boardroom, and we beat him in his own dark, dirty world. We end this together." A single, perfect tear escaped his eye and traced a path down his cheek. He leaned in and kissed her, not with the fire and passion of their previous encounters, but with a deep, reverent tenderness that spoke of a promise far more binding than any ring. The price of their love was danger, but for the first time they were both willing to pay it. The day of the emergency shareholders' meeting dawned gray and stormy, the Santon skyline bruised with dark clouds that mirrored the tempest brewing inside the Innovate SA headquarters. The atmosphere in the grand auditorium was electric with tension, a coliseum where the fate of a corporate empire would be decided by a vote. On one side sat Marco, a figure of immutable calm in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his face an unreadable mask of control. Beside him, Zara was the picture of poised elegance, her presence a silent statement of solidarity that had not gone unnoticed by the assembled press and shareholders. On the other side of the room, Nico Gallo lounged in his chair, flanked by his lawyers, his arrogance a palpable force. He believed he had already won. He had spent weeks buying off, threatening and blackmailing smaller shareholders, securing a block of votes he thought was insurmountable. He looked at Zara and Marco with open contempt, seeing them as the final vestiges of a legacy he was about to bulldoze. The meeting began with formal presentations, a dry recitation of figures and projections. Nico's team went first, presenting their wildly inflated offer as a gift to the shareholders, a golden parachute from a company they painted as failing under its current leadership. Then it was Marco's turn. He stood, not at the podium, but in the center of the room, commanding attention with his sheer presence. He spoke not of numbers, but of vision, of legacy, of building something that would last for generations. It was a powerful, compelling performance, but Zara knew it was not enough to sway the votes Nico had already poisoned. The real battle was about to begin. As Marco concluded his speech and the chairman prepared to call for a vote, Zara stood. A quiet murmur rippled through the room. She was not on the agenda to speak. "Mr. Chairman," she said, her voice clear and strong, resonating through the auditorium's excellent acoustics. "Before the shareholders cast a vote that will determine the future of this company, there is some due diligence material that has just come to light. I believe it is of the utmost relevance to the character and financial stability of our new bidder." A large screen behind the chairman's desk, previously displaying the Innovate SA logo, flickered to life. It showed a complex web of offshore accounts, shell corporations, and wire transfers. It was the result of weeks of tireless, clandestine work by a team of forensic accountants Marco had hired at her direction. With the calm, precise delivery of a seasoned news anchor, Zara began to walk the shareholders through the evidence. She meticulously unraveled Nico's corporate empire, revealing it to be a house of cards built on money laundering, racketeering, and funding from known international crime syndicates. She showed irrefutable proof that the money for his takeover bid was not legitimate capital, but laundered funds, a move that would place Innovate SA under immediate and permanent federal investigation. She had not attacked Nico's character with rumors or innuendo. She had executed him with cold, hard, undeniable facts, using her mastery of crisis communications to frame the narrative perfectly. Panic began to erupt in the room as shareholders who had pledged their votes to Nico realized they were seconds away from tying their fortunes to a criminal enterprise. His smug smirk had vanished, replaced by a mask of apoplectic rage. While Zara was surgically dismantling Nico's corporate facade in public, Marco was delivering the final, private blow. He leaned across the aisle, his voice a low, deadly whisper that only his cousin could hear. "This is what you never understood, Nico. You think power comes from the barrel of a gun or a back-alley threat. You are a dinosaur. True power is information. While you were busy threatening Zara, my people were having very quiet conversations with your associates in Europe, the ones you betrayed. The ones who are now more than happy to cooperate with Interpol in exchange for immunity." He slid a single, folded piece of paper across the table. "That is a copy of the arrest warrant that will be executed the moment you step outside this building. Your assets are frozen. Your allies are gone. You have nothing left." He leaned back in his chair. "You can stay and watch your world burn, or you can leave now and spend what little time you have left as a free man. Your choice." Nico's face went pale, a sickly, greenish white. He looked from the warrant in his trembling hand to Marco's cold, unforgiving eyes, and he finally understood. He had brought a knife to a nuclear war. Without a word, he stood up and, followed by his bewildered lawyers, walked out of the auditorium, a man already defeated. The vote was a mere formality. Valentino Holdings won with a staggering 98% majority. The room erupted in applause, but Marco and Zara only had eyes for each other. They had won, not just a company, but their future. That evening, they stood in the silence of his penthouse office, the storm having broken, leaving behind a clean, rain-washed city that glittered below them. The chaotic battle was over, and a profound peace settled between them. Marco had made the final calls, severing the last operational ties to the more unsavory elements of his family's past, consolidating his power fully into the legitimate world he had built. He turned to Zara, taking both of her hands in his. My father always told me that a man is defined by the empire he builds, he said, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him before. I thought he meant buildings and companies and wealth. I was wrong. He meant legacy. He meant family. He did not pull out a ring. Their journey had been too unconventional for such a traditional gesture. Instead, he looked her in the eye, his soul bare for her to see. There are no more rules, Zara, no more arrangements, just a choice. I am choosing you. Build this empire with me. Not behind me or beside me, but with me, as my partner, my equal, my queen. Tears welled in Zara's eyes, not of sadness or fear, but of a joy so profound it was breathtaking. She had started this journey terrified of belonging to any man, and had ended it by finding the one man she wanted to belong with on her own terms. Yes, she whispered, her voice full of certainty. Yes. He pulled her into his arms, and as they stood together, two survivors of a war they had won together, they looked out at the city lights, no longer just a view, but a kingdom they would rule as one.